This is why you should never go downstairs alone. In 1984, an old widowed lady lived in a 2-story house who was completely immobile and bound to a wheelchair. Ever since the mysterious death of her husband, she required a caretaker to come once a day to help her out with things. The most difficult thing the caretaker had to do was pick up the old woman and carry her up and down the stairs because she was paralyzed. A couple months later, police receive a phone call saying there has been a murder and the murderer has fled the scene. The officer walked in the door and noticed the caretaker's body was on the floor with her vocal cords ripped out. He noticed the old woman sitting in her wheelchair at the top of the stairs, but immediately ruled her out because she was paralyzed. He looked around and saw a phone was on the TV stand, but thought nothing of it, so decided to check upstairs. He creaked open the bathroom door. Nothing. He creaked open the laundry door. Nothing. The last bedroom, he began to get really anxious and pulled out his weapon. He creaked open the old woman's door and said to himself, "There's no phone up here. How did we receive the call?" He ran back looking for the old woman, but found nothing but an empty wheelchair at the top of the stairs.
This is why things are never as they seem. Once there was a man who didn't want to get married because he didn't want to spend money on anyone else. He thought that if he got married, he would have to pay for his wife's food, clothes, and other items, which he didn't want to do. However, one day he came across a beautiful young woman who oddly never ate a single thing. He thought this was perfect. He wouldn't have to pay for her food and she could be his wife. He quickly asked her to marry him. But of course, things are not as they seem. He noticed that his supply of food was disappearing even though he never saw his wife eat. So one day he decided to spy on her. And what he saw was terrifying. He saw his wife's hair part in the back, revealing a huge mouth on the back of her head. Her skull split open and the mouth was unnaturally wide with huge teeth. Then he watched as his wife's hair twisted into a long strand, grasped handfuls of food and shoved it into the mouth on the back of her head. When she noticed her husband, she attacked him. He managed to get away and hide in the mountains. Weeks later, when he got the courage to return, he found his wife gone and all of his food taken. The man never married again. If you ever see a red car, don't do what he did. Once there was a man in Mexico who took a night shift at work. After work, as he was walking home, he saw a bright red car. The red car pulled up in front of him and 3 women were inside. They asked if he needed a ride home, and because he thought they were beautiful and harmless young women, he agreed. The next morning, his wife realized he never came back home. She called his work and they didn't know where he was either, so she called the police. The police then went to his workplace, which is where he was last seen, and began searching. A few miles away, they found his body. It was lying on the side of the road with strange symbols carved all over. The 3 women in the red car turned out to be witches who traveled the road looking for men, usually those who wander the streets late at night. When they found these men, they would entice them to get into their car with them, promise him they could fulfill all of his dreams, then begin their dark occult ritual where he would be sacrificed to the devil. But the most disturbing part of the story is that the bright red car that these witches were driving were painted from the blood of all of their victims. Can you imagine being locked inside your house for your whole life? Caroline's aunt and uncle said she was so ugly that she had to be hidden from the world. If anyone saw her, she'd be taken to the church and burned at the stake. But things are not as they seem. One day, Caroline started asking questions. She wanted to know why the other kids could play outside, but she could only sit and look out from her bedroom window. This made her aunt and uncle very angry. They said, "Can't you see yourself? Don't you understand the sacrifices we've had to make to keep you hidden from the world?" She had been convinced that staying trapped was for her own good, but one day she decided to escape. She used a safety pin to unlock the door and left. However, soon after she made it out, 2 men wearing uniforms started shouting at her. She began running. When she turned a corner, she saw a group of people who pointed at her and screamed, "Monster." Eventually, a priest came and said, "Take her to the church." They dragged Caroline to the church, put her on an altar, and set her on fire. As the fire grew, the priest turned to the crowd and said, "Look at this monster. Look at her hands, only 5 fingers. Look at her face, only 2 eyes, and her teeth a sickening white."
This is why you should always make sure you're home alone. One day, 2 police officers are sitting in their car waiting for their next call. They pull over a couple cars, but nothing unusual. A couple hours later, they get a call saying a woman feels like there is somebody in her house and she is hiding. The police, thinking it's some sort of home invasion, begin to rush to the scene. They pull up to the house and notice all of their lights are off and the doors are closed. The police begin to try and open the door, but the door is locked. They decided to be quicker if they just bust a window and enter the scene. They busted the window and begin searching. One officer says, "I'll search the left of the house and you search the right," and they both agree. The officer on the right finds a bathroom door that is cracked, and as he's opening it, he hears scratching and a faint whispering in the bedroom. He stops what he's doing and opens the door to the room. He pulls out his weapon and aims it at the closet and said, "Whoever's in there, come out now." He opens the door and finds nothing. At the same time, the officer to the left says, "I found her, the house is clear."
This is why you should always trust your gut. Sabrina was about to head to college, but she had one big insecurity, her glasses, so she felt really excited when she finally scheduled her LASIK surgery. During her initial consultation with her doctor, though, she noticed some strange behaviors. He'd always scratch the top of his hairline, sometimes every few minutes. She also caught him trying to write with the cap of his pen still on and looking confused about why no ink was coming out. but she just brushed it off. She was excited to never wear glasses again, so she decided to go ahead with it. During surgery, she felt a dash of darkness. She felt something pull on her eye. It wasn't painful due to the numbing drops that she'd used, but she could still feel it. She thought this must be normal. Until a few weeks later, she woke up and her eyes were bloodshot. She went into her bathroom and saw that she had a huge lump under her eye. She tried to blink, but she couldn't close her eyes all the way. And as Sabrina leaned closer to the mirror to try and touch it, she saw in her own reflection something alive was moving inside. Never play this game with your friends. Once there was a group of girls who heard about the game Baby Blue. They didn't believe in it but thought they could scare their friend Laura. So they sent Laura into a bathroom by herself. She turned off the lights, closed the door, and put her arms out as if to hold a baby. Then started chanting Baby Blue 13 times. What happened next cannot be explained. Laura felt a heavy weight in her arms. Then she felt the weight in her arms scratching her. She was terrified and didn't know what to do. She wanted to drop it, but she was afraid of what might happen if she did, so she froze, and the weight grew heavier and heavier. Suddenly, she saw a woman in the bathroom mirror with a twisted look on her face. She screamed in terror. When her friends heard her scream, they tried to open the door, but it was locked. When they finally opened the door, they found Laura on the floor. Her eyes had been scratched out. They tried to move her body, but they couldn't, because something large and invisible was pinning her to the ground. Never play this game with your friends. Once there was a group of girls who heard about the game Baby Blue. They didn't believe in it but thought they could scare their friend Laura. So they sent Laura into a bathroom by herself. She turned off the lights, closed the door, and put her arms out as if to hold a baby. Then started chanting Baby Blue 13 times. What happened next cannot be explained. Laura felt a heavy weight in her arms. Then she felt the weight in her arms scratching her. She was terrified and didn't know what to do. She wanted to drop it, but she was afraid of what might happen if she did, so she froze, and the weight grew heavier and heavier. Suddenly, she saw a woman in the bathroom mirror with a twisted look on her face. She screamed in terror. When her friends heard her scream, they tried to open the door, but it was locked. When they finally opened the door, they found Laura on the floor. Her eyes had been scratched out. They tried to move her body, but they couldn't, because something large and invisible was pinning her to the ground. This is why you should never Google yourself. Some of us might have done it once or twice, but for Honora Petrova, one simple search led to horrifying consequences. Honora had always wanted to be an ice skater. She was young, talented, successful, and had a famous trainer. The night before her first big championship win, she felt more anxious than usual. For fun, she Googled herself and came across a Wikipedia page saying that she would win. When she did win, Honora thought this must be a coincidence. But every time after that, the page would predict whether she won or lost. She checked it every single time, almost addicted to refreshing that site. When she was about to compete in another huge competition, she decided to manipulate the website by changing the outcome it predicted. But instead, it said, Honora Petrova is going to get what she deserves. Right after, she was accused of sabotaging another girl's skates, which ended up slicing her in the forehead. Even though Honora denied it, she was banned from the competition and was dropped by her trainer. She thought this must be the worst of it until she checked the website the next day and saw a terrifying message about her. Follow for part 2 of the story. This is why you should never Google yourself. Honora Petrova became obsessed with constantly refreshing a website that predicted whether or not she would win her ice skating competitions. But things took an extreme turn when she decided to manipulate the website's predictions by editing it herself. This caused her to be banned from the competition and be dropped by her trainer. But things got so much worse when she refreshed the page again and saw a terrifying message about her. This time, it said she would be an orphan. She immediately called her parents, but she only heard maniacal laughter over the phone. After her parents died of a terrible accident, the police said that there were no records of her calls to her parents at all. She became reclusive after that and moved to another country, where she tried to reinvent herself. Eventually, she stopped checking the website and things went back to normal, until she wanted to audition for the ice circus. She checked the website again to see whether or not she would make it, but it only said one thing. It said, at midnight, Honora Petrova died friendless and alone. The next day, her body was found next to her computer. Have you ever met someone who wouldn't take no for an answer? That's what happened to Jillian, but things took a strange and unexpected turn. Jillian always went to this one cafe, and one day she bumped into a young man. His name was Charles. Charles came from a wealthy family and thought that no woman could ever say no to him. He asked Jillian to have coffee with him, and she did. They had a friendly conversation for a while, but by the time the cafe was about to close, Charles gently grabbed Jillian by the hand and asked her out. She said, "I'm sorry, you're just not my type," and left. This made Charles furious. From then on, he'd come to the same cafe every single day to hope hope that Jillian was there. It got to the point where Jillian would look through the window and see Charles waiting for her. She'd feel uncomfortable and leave. It just seemed like he wouldn't take no for an answer. But things were not so simple. One day, it was the final straw. Charles brought flowers to the cafe and waited for Jillian. When she didn't show up, Charles took the flowers, threw them on the ground, and stomped on them. He yelled, "That's it, I'm gonna make you my girlfriend if it's the last thing I do." The next day, he looked up Jillian's address in the phone book and went to her house, but he could never have expected what he would find there. Follow for part 2. Have you ever met someone who wouldn't take no for an answer? Charles became obsessed with Jillian after she blew him off at the cafe. Charles was the type of man who couldn't accept that anyone might reject him, so he found Jillian's address from the phone book and went to her house. He knocked on the door many times until he heard Jillian's voice say, "Charles, what the heck are you doing?" Charles replied, "I don't get why you wouldn't go out with me. We had such a great conversation in the cafe." Jillian replied, "I already told you, you're just not my type. But if you really want to know what my type is, I can show you." Then she opened the door. Charles stepped in. "You see that door at the end of the hallway? Go in there and you'll see the type of man I like." Charles eagerly went in and saw a staircase leading down to the basement. What happened next would shock anyone. When he got to the bottom of the stairs, he smelled a horrible rotting smell. Then he saw that he was surrounded by 12 or 13 bodies nailed to the wall. All of them were headless. On the table against the wall, their heads were arranged in a row. Suddenly, Charles felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned around and saw Jillian with an axe. Jillian swung the axe, and as Charles's head flew across the room, Jillian picked it up, looked it dead in the eye, and said, "Now you're my type."
I'm going to be telling you the scary story of the house I lived in elementary and middle school. It was a 3-bedroom house, 1 bedroom in the basement, and 2 bedrooms upstairs. Because I was the oldest, I got put in the bedroom in the basement. Right when we moved in, I already had creepy feelings about the house. I hated being downstairs by myself. One day I dropped a $20 bill behind my dresser. I decided to move my dresser all by myself, and behind the dresser was this door. It wasn't a normal door, it was really short and just squared. It was also glued off, so I couldn't get into it. Me and my neighbor, who were best friends, worked at it for days to get into it. We finally got it open, and inside was another room. It was almost like an underground attic. The walls were wooden, the ceiling was wooden, there was no carpet, but it smelled awful. My parents found out and they were super mad at me for opening the room. They of course put that dresser in front of that door for a reason because they knew I would explore it. But after that, things started to get weird. Stay tuned for part 2. This is part 2 of my scary childhood story about the door behind my dresser. Of course, my parents were really mad at us for opening it up, so they sealed it back up. They just didn't want us to get hurt from all the rusty nails or if there was mold inside. But I think we released something when we opened that door and a lot of things started to happen. First, I started having night terrors to the point where I would scream at the top of my lungs and not wake up. My parents would have to come downstairs and wake me up and put me back to bed. Then, every single night, I would have this reoccurring dream that me, my mom, and my brother were all at a picnic at the beach. This super old lady would walk up to us and she would take me. She then would lock me up in the room behind my dresser. This dream would reoccur every single night for months. It scared me so much that I started to not sleep at night. I developed insomnia and would only sleep for 2 to 3 hours per night at only 8 years old. There was a couple nights where I swear I saw the old lady standing in the corner of my room. My parents just thought I was hallucinating from no sleep though. Stay tuned for part 3. This is part 3 of my scary childhood story about the door behind my dresser. Because I wasn't sleeping and developed insomnia, my parents took me to a sleep therapist. The only thing the therapist gave me was a bunch of sleeping pills. Even though the sleeping pills worked, it made my dreams so much worse. I even started walking in my sleep. I would wake up all the time not in my bed. My covers would be all the way across the room like someone had dragged them over there. One night, one of my best friends slept over and we heard knocking coming from the door behind my dresser. That night when we went to bed, she started speaking really creepy gibberish in her sleep. I had to go get my mom to wake her up. I woke up a couple nights feeling like I was suffocating, and when I swung out of bed, I saw a silhouette of an old lady. My cat even started to sit there and meow and hiss at random things in the corners of the room. But there was nothing ever there. It got so bad to the point where I moved up into my brother's room.
Can you solve this mystery? This is the story of the missing girl from a small village in Japan. All the clues are hidden in what I'm about to say. Once there was a girl named Madoka-chan who went to the park with her mother for a play date with her friend. While she was playing with her friend, her mom started chatting with the other girl's mom. When she looked back, Madoka was gone. The other girl said she went to play on the slides by herself and she hasn't seen her since. Madoka was reported as a missing person. Her parents and the police searched for months with no progress. 6 months later, her parents decided to try one last thing. They called a psychic. They brought in some of Madoka's belongings, and when the psychic touched them, she went into a trance. She shut her eyes and said, "Your daughter is still alive. Her heart still beats and her lungs still breathe. Her eyes gaze at a luxury home. Her stomach contains only the finest cuisine. Her parents hugged each other, ecstatic. They knew their daughter was still out there somewhere. They asked, "Where is she now?" The psychic hesitated for a moment before her eyes opened and she said, "Madoka-chan is all over the world." What happened to the missing girl? Let's see if you can solve this mystery. Has anyone ever told you not to do something and that just made you want to do it more? For these three girls, their curiosity would lead to something terrifying. These girls went to high school together and one night they decided to have a sleepover. They were also fans of horror movies, so they thought it would be nice to rent one out and watch it. They eventually found a video rental store on the street corner and went inside. They would soon regret this decision. They asked a woman behind the counter if she had any suggestions for horror movies that they could watch. The woman said she had the perfect movie for them and went into the back room. Then one of the girls noticed that an old and rusted videotape was lying on the counter. She picked it up and was instantly curious, but things got intense when the woman came back. She slammed her hands down on the old videotape and pulled it away. She said, "That's not something you should be watching." The woman wouldn't say anything else, only that it was a home movie. Then she handed them a regular horror movie. The girls agreed to rent that one out instead, but one of the girls was still too curious. She wanted to know what was in that old tape, so when the woman wasn't looking, she put it in her purse and left with it. When the girls came home, they decided to watch the old tape together, but what they saw on there would both shock and terrify them. Follow for part 2. Has anyone ever told you not to do something and that just made you want to do it more? Once, three girls went into a video rental store to find a horror movie to watch. They came across an old tape, but the woman at the store told them they weren't allowed to watch it. After one girl stole the tape, they decided to watch it together, but what they would see would terrify them. They pressed play. Suddenly, the room went into darkness, with only the TV on. On screen, they saw a woman tied to a wooden stake. She was surrounded by an angry crowd carrying torches, until one man walked towards the woman and set the wood beneath her feet on fire. The woman began laughing, and as the flames reached her face, she screamed that all who witnessed her death would suffer the same fate in 2 days. Then the tape cut off. The girls were scared, but eventually convinced themselves it was a prank. They decided to return the tape, but when they went back to the store, they found that it was gone. It was just an abandoned building. 2 days later, all three girls were found scattered across the city, their bodies burned beyond recognition. When the police investigated the strange coincidence, they found nothing around the girls had been touched by flames at all, except the trash can outside of one of their homes. Everything inside had been turned to ash, except for one mysterious videotape, which was left untouched. Can you solve this mystery? This is a story of a strange man whose house mysteriously caught on fire, but things are not as they seem. All the clues to what really happened are hidden in what I'm about to say. So this man is what we would call a hoarder, but instead of collecting things like books or clothing, he collected garbage. Eventually this bothered the neighbors, especially the terrible smell that came from the house. Then a reporter came around wanting to understand why he did it, but the man refused to speak. That night he watched the reporter talk about him on the news, saying he was a desperate man with a lot of debt who developed a strange habit after his wife ran away. The man didn't care. He just continued to stuff his house full of garbage from the floor to the ceiling. However, one day an incident caught a lot of attention. The house mysteriously caught on fire. The man was not in the house, so he was safe, but when he returned, everything had turned to ash. Some people suspected an angry neighbor might have done it, but the man didn't seem bothered at all. Actually, it was convenient for him. He collected insurance and got himself a small apartment. He never collected garbage again. He didn't need to anymore. What really happened here? Can you solve this mystery?
Have you ever wondered how long a human can actually stay awake? Randy Gardner in 1964 did something no human has ever done. He broke the world record for the longest time consecutively awake. Randy was a high school student who needed a good grade on his science fair project. So him and his friends decided to put his body through some sleep deprivation to see what the results would be. With the help of Stanford University, they connected him to an EEG machine. Pretty much it just monitors your brainwave. They concluded that parts of his brain were actually sleeping while he was awake. This is called microsleep. In fact, 41% of drivers every single day microsleep. During the first 48 hours, confusion set in. The third day he was awake, he became incredibly grouchy and began to slur. On the fourth day, the hallucinations set in. Each day grew worse and worse, but on day 10, he beat one of the researchers in a game of ping pong. And the EEG reported that he had little to no energy loss whatsoever. On day 11, he officially announced he was done and stayed awake for 264 hours. To put into comparison how long that is, iCarly episodes are 23 minutes each. He would have had to watch 688 iCarly episodes.
Do you style your hair the same way every day? Well, there's an urban legend about a woman who always wore her hair in a bun, but for her, this habit would lead to something terrifying. This woman loved wearing her hair in a bun, but she might have taken it a bit too far. She didn't want to style her hair differently or even take out her bun to clean her hair. Whenever she took a shower, she would just wear a shower cap to make sure the water didn't mess up her bun. At night, she would sleep with a towel around her hair so the bun didn't move. After a while, she had to put hairspray in it to mask the smell. Then her scalp started feeling itchy, so she would put more hairspray in it. Even when the itching got intense, she just applied more hairspray. But her husband finally found out about how bad the situation had gotten when he woke up one day and his wife was still asleep. He tried to wake her up, but she wouldn't move. She had died in the middle of the night. The husband called the police, fearing that something unusual might have happened. But when her body was examined, they finally took out her bun. Inside her hair, they found something terrifying. They found a huge spider had gotten into her hair, made a nest, and laid eggs. When the baby spiders hatched, they bit through her skull and ate her brain. Have you ever felt like you're being watched by someone or something while being entirely alone? Once there was a hunter who was in the middle of the woods. After a long day of hunting, he had lost his bearings, so he just decided to go one direction until he could find a way out. After a few hours, he found a small cabin. Having no other choice as it was getting really dark, he decided to see if he could stay there for the night. The door was open, no one was inside. He went on the bed and just decided he would apologize and explain himself to the owner of the cabin in the morning. But as he tried to go to sleep, he saw the entire cabin was decorated with portraits, all painted in extreme detail. Their faces weren't normal. They were all twisted, angry, and hateful. These disturbing paintings made him really uncomfortable, but he just tried to ignore them as much as he could and went to sleep. As he woke up the next morning, he got up from the bed and realized that there are no portraits on the walls of the cabin at all. Instead, they were windows. This is why you should never reply to a stranger's email. For a boy named John, one mysterious email would change everything. So one day, John went on his laptop to find an email from two girls. These two girls claimed that they were his older sisters, which confused him because he knew he was an only child. But these girls said that his bedroom had been their bedroom, and they lived happily until one horrible night. John opened an attachment in the email that he got, and it was an old newspaper article saying that two sisters were murdered in his hometown. They were lying in bed when an intruder broke in. No one heard anything, and in the morning, the parents found the sisters in the closet. They had been skinned. No intruder or motive was ever found. In this email, these girls said that they were angry that everyone forgot about them, and angry that their parents decided to move on with a new baby, a boy named John. They were angry that their brother never knew about them until now. John, of course, didn't believe any of this, so he sent an email back saying that he knew the newspaper was fake and to stop trying to scare him. But only minutes later, he got another email, and what this email said would terrify him. Follow for part 2. This is why you should never reply to a stranger's email. John got an email from two girls claiming to be his sisters even though he was an only child. What's even stranger is that these girls claimed that they were murdered in his house. They were found skinned in the closet. When the investigation failed and no one was found responsible, the parents decided to move on with a new baby. That baby was John, who grew up without knowing anything about his sisters. That's what the emails claimed anyways. John replied to this email saying that he didn't believe them, but that was his fatal mistake. Minutes later, he got another email. It said, "If you don't believe us, look in the closet." The next morning, John was gone. His parents called the police, who found the emails on his laptop and the closet door slightly open. Then they saw what would shock them. They found John in his closet, also skinned alive. Nowhere in the house was there any sign of an intruder. Then when they looked closer, they found something else. A row of faint writing on the wall that read Lisa and Sarah 1993. Then just below it, freshly carved into the wood, John 2007.